All right. Welcome to this week's live office hours. Casey, how's it going, man?
It's going well. Weather's getting warm, so that's always good. And yeah, the summer is upon us out of nowhere, it seems.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, lots of nice sunny weather finally coming through, which is lovely. Getting all that heat, which is not necessarily my personal favorite. I kind of like the cold. I like to be bundled up, but I know I'm the weird one in the group. So
I go both ways. I like to be bundled in the winter, but when it's nice outside, I like to have the heat for sure.
yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I like going to the beach every now and then for like an hour. Otherwise I just get completely burnt because I'm pale. So yeah. So as everybody's jumping in here, we're going to give it a few minutes as everybody's jumping in. Just keep in mind, this is live office hours. There's no format, so it's completely open-ended. So, drop any questions you have. Could be related to repricing, could be related to Aura, could be related to just selling or scaling or operations. Any of your burning questions, we're happy to dive deep into. And if not, we'll just kind of rant here for a bit and kind of get the gears turning. I'm not sure if you've been keeping up, Casey, with NVIDIA. They're releasing a lot of really cool stuff. So NVIDIA makes all basically the chips that power AI companies, which is why they're doing amazing right now. And they had a massive keynote in Taiwan recently, showcasing some really interesting stuff. So I don't fully understand it, but it's very low level. But what's cool is they're doing a lot of basically they're creating like a clone of Earth, like a digital super clone. And what that allows you to do is now predict how like weather events are going to occur. And the reason why I bring this up is it really got my mind thinking about, what if you could do that with markets? What if you could create a real-time digital clone of Amazon, like based on all the data, sales, all that stuff, and then kind of predict what's going to happen next?
Sure.
And then that opens up an interesting door. Obviously, like the cost of doing that would be astronomical. So we couldn't do it. I don't even think Amazon would readily do it because the cost would be so high, and what's the upside for them. But it does kind of highlight where we're going, which is like everything is digital, but what happens when you can kind of encapsulate that complexity into something? We're already kind of doing this at a very low grade way with Maven, right? We're seeing how all these variables are changing and then saying, okay, cool. Based on all that, what do I need to do? But if you take that simple concept and extrapolate it out to something far more complex, like not just one listing, but also looking at the entire history of that listing, making, greater predictions as to where's the market going for this listing, or where's the market going period for this category. That gets really interesting to me. So, I think there's a possible near-term future where you're able to predict more macro level changes, which could help sellers, right? You look at that, okay, well, this category is about to go into a slump. Okay, well, maybe I need to be more aggressive with my pricing, sell out of that category, but this other category is kind of starting to take off on demand. Let me go ahead and reallocate capital into inventory that fits that criteria or that category. And so that gets kind of interesting. It also helps kind of illustrate using data to make really massive bets. A lot of times when you're talking, making a decision as a business owner, you're making bets in a lot of cases. And a good way to think about making these bets is expected value. It's like a whole equation thing, right? If you're in statistics, this is like one of the core concepts. Basically, it's called an EV bet. So you say, okay, EV, expected value. What is the upside if this goes well? Let's call it 10 grand. Okay, what's the probability of it going well? Let's call it, 40%. Okay, cool. So we take the 10 grand, multiply it by 0.4. That's our upside theoretically. Then we say, what if this goes horribly wrong? What's the downside? Let's say we lose all 10 grand. Okay, well, what's the probability? Well, it's 10% probability. Okay, cool. So that we have positive EV. So like, it's not a guarantee that it's not going to go well, but it helped you make more rationally mathematical based decisions.
Sure.
And imagine taking that concept and applying it more macro and having that level of foresight, leverage, power, whatever you want to call it as a seller. that's incredible. I mean, that's how you really take an average person and make them kind of superhuman, in my opinion.
Sure. Yeah, it's really interesting how like those predictive models have really come into play in a lot of different areas recently. I'm a big sports guy. I know that baseball specifically is so statistics
Moneyball.
driven, and they've got yeah, exactly, and they've got all sorts of now. I mean, Moneyball was almost like 20 years ago when that first started. So
Yeah.
now there's all these predictive methods and algorithms and formulas on top of Moneyball. So it's really amazing what you can do with the data that's available. And yeah, it would be really interesting to see what a makeshift Amazon marketplace would look like, just to kind of see how things trend. I know everyone's always trying to plan for Q4 in terms of stocking up, making sure you have enough stock, making sure you're priced well during that time. And it would be interesting to see specifically for that time of year what that predictive model would spit out in terms of results and metrics there.
Yeah. One idea that just came to mind that would be incredible if ever possible. Let's say you're sourcing, doing OA. Could you have a Chrome extension or something along those lines that can basically do this expected value calculation for you before you make the purchase, right? Like as you're looking at the product, it goes, hey, like this has a 60% likelihood of crushing it, or hey, like it looks good, but here's kind of where this could really go wrong. It's probably a negative EV bet, even though it's technically profitable. There's a lot of issues with it that could actually help you avoid those. So now you almost have this, and I know I've geeked out about this before, but this like sourcing copilot, right? If you can aggregate all this data, because that's essentially what you're doing as a seller, right? You're learning all this skill set and experience to be able to make these bets using your intuition, experience, what have you, and ideally checklists and whatnot. But what if you could take all that information, externalize it to some kind of like AI platform, and now it can basically do that for you, and ideally better, right? There's also what if that does become true, now you can basically just feed it products. 24/7, right? You just have a system that just like finds, it scrapes all of the websites and just goes check, 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 found something interesting, kicks it to you to make the purchase, and then like keeps on going, right? Like, and that could run 24/7, right? This is, you know, I remember using tools like Tactical Arbitrage or testing that when I was a seller, and just like I've yet to find someone who makes it very profitable. So I'm not sure how it works. But you know, basic web scraping is essentially what's happening here, and then doing some kind of checks and balances. But you know, in an ideal world, how would you, like, the problem it's trying to solve makes a ton of sense, but I think the way the solution has been built, especially because of how old it is now, doesn't really solve it in a modern cutting edge kind of way. And I think that problem will always exist of finding profitable inventory. And so how do you use modern technology and all the cutting edge stuff to solve that in a very novel way? That gets pretty interesting to me.
Yeah. It'd be interesting. And I'm sure a lot of those tools take this into account, but something around like average purchase price plus, or with whatever your cost would be. And then also observing like how many competitors are on that specific listing broken down by marketplace, you know, X number on Walmart, Y on Amazon, and kind of moving down the line there and spitting out some kind of health score on a product, if you will. But yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's very similar to how analysts will analyze a public stock and say, hey, this is a, you know, it's a buy or it's a sell or it's a hold. And like, here's all the justification for it. You can almost take that same kind of methodology and perspective and apply it to individual SKUs. And what's cool is if you understand the seasonality of things, you can say, hey, it is a good SKU, just not now. Wait 3 months, and actually it will be great. And oh, by the way, I'll just remind you in 3 months about that. You can forget about it. Like that's obviously very pie in the sky right now, but these things are becoming more and more possible. Probable, I'm not going to say, but possible. Certainly.
At least within reach, as opposed to seeming so far off and unrealistic.
Yeah, there's like a path to get there, although it's an incredibly complicated thing to solve. Like that's not an easy thing to do in any way, shape, or form. There's so much complexity to what I just said in reality. But you're like, all right, cool. Like the components are starting to get built here. That's pretty interesting. If we put this together the right way and like solve a few of the major hurdles, and if the cost could make sense, that could be kind of huge. So who knows? For all we know, that already exists, and some of the largest sellers have built it and just told nobody about it. there's this concept of the future is already here. It's just not equally distributed, meaning most of your newer cutting edge things are here. That's just not mainstream yet because they're in academia or R&D labs, what have you. And I was talking to an engineer in Boston not too long ago about this kind of concept of, could you design a fully autonomous company using AI? Like, it doesn't have to be complicated, right? It's just something simple. And he made a comment that was like, based on what I know, I would bet that already exists.
Yeah.
And just nobody's talking about it. I was like, yeah, that actually seems possible. Again, probable. I don't know. Possible. Absolutely.
Right.
So nice. As everybody's jumping in here, I know we're just kind of geeking out right now just to kind of get the session started here. Make sure to throw any comments, questions you have related to, again, anything is on the table here. So it could be repricing, Aura, how do you do certain things? If you're getting stumped anywhere, have any feedback, just an open session basically for Casey and I to be able to go deep into the different things that you have top of mind as a seller, as an Aura user, as a potential Aura user. We're happy to go down into any rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's been a fun couple of weeks. I've started to do some onboarding calls myself. Finn is no longer going to be the only person working with you folks getting set up. So luck of the draw if you get me or him. But yeah, first couple have been smooth and just working with some nice early stage users, kind of getting set up, getting a little bit more familiar with the space. So, but yeah, like Dylan said, any easy questions, any entry level questions, or any advanced questions, happy to dive deep into anything you guys are thinking about.
Let's see. Luke has a question here. This is my first office hours. Awesome. Happy to have you here. I think I heard once that you were working on a more aggressive AI, such as for liquidation. Is this still in the works? So specifically for liquidation, you can basically just use a role-based strategy and it works just as well. So I'm less inclined to design that, but there is early stages in terms of kind of thinking through different versions of the model, or extending the model itself. So there's a few variations of how we could do this, where like one model's really designed for one thing, another model is designed for another thing. Or what I think makes a little bit more sense in my mind immediately is we take the current Maven model and then extend its capabilities. It's kind of like, if you have a Tesla with full self-driving, an update comes out and it goes great. It's still FSD, but like there's upgrades to it and there's changes and now there's new functionality, bug fixes, what have you. And what a lot of times when people want things to be more aggressive, it's usually based on the life cycle of the product. So they've held it a little too long. They need to liquidate. So one concept internally that we're kind of talking about is what if you could say, hey, I want you to do your thing that you're designed to do, but after 60, 90 days, you kind of set that variable. I actually want to get rid of the inventory, and it could take advantage and use different sets of behaviors to basically get a different outcome for you after that period of time. To me, I kind of like that because a lot of times you're going in and out of stock for the same SKU. And so anytime you have to go from strategy A to B back to A, I really don't like that that complexity. It seems relatively simple, but if you think about automating that, it creates a little bit of work for you. So I do naturally want to go to increasing the capabilities and functionality of the single model. So you just say, use this, and then like it knows to do everything inside of that kind of life cycle. Casey, anything you want to add on to that?
No, I would definitely agree. I think it makes more sense to sort of increase or improve Maven's current functionality as opposed to creating a different AI with its own logic and things like that. Would probably be quicker to iterate on Maven as opposed to building another one from scratch. And then, as you mentioned, Luke, there is a way you can set up a liquidation strategy using our rules-based options. There is a help article. So if you go actually into the chat function on your account, you can search our help docs. And if you type in liquidation, that help doc will come up. But some folks will use like a 0% ROI targeting the buy box to either match it, maybe they're pricing below it. And if you do want to go into a negative ROI, you will just have to set those min prices manually. There's no way for Aura to do an auto calculation for a negative profit margin right now. So if you want to go into negative ROI, you'll just want to flip the min max section to manual and then just manually set those prices for you.
Nice. Yeah, great question there, Luke. Say, Josh, what's up, guys? Do you have any opinions or recommendations on merchant fulfilled listings using Maven in terms of pricing? As an example, I'm on a few merchant fulfilled friendly listings currently matching or slightly lower than the buy box price, but have not gotten the buy box. I'm trying to amp up the merchant fulfilled part of my business for cash flow practice things. Great question. This one's a little bit more complicated because being merchant fulfilled, you're going to have less flexibility in getting in the buy box simply because of regional. So Amazon's going to prioritize other merchant fulfilled offers that are regionally close to that buyer, that potential buyer. So it depends on how spread out the buyers are for that particular listing, in the Amazon network. So, or relative to you, should I say. So you're going to have those issues, and it's less about like a pricing problem and more just a logistical one, which is kind of outside of our realm. And the thing about it too, especially with merchant fulfilled, depending on how deep your quantity is, being in the buy box is not necessarily the most impactful thing, because just like other sellers can take a regional buy box from you, you can also take it from them. So, if your velocity is holding pretty healthy, I actually wouldn't touch that, because you're going to get really good profitability. If you find that you're not moving velocity fast enough, that's a different story. So it's less about tweaking things in Aura and more just understanding that there's going to be gives and takes. Like you're basically trading higher profit margins for less efficiency, if you will, if you were to be FBA. That's the kind of the way I think about it. Casey, anything you want to add on to that one though?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And just as a reminder here, Josh, Maven's not specifically designed to target and win the buy box. It is more so focused on what it considers to be that optimal price. So if you were looking to mostly be in the buy box, you may want to switch to a buy box targeting strategy. But given that everything that Dylan just broke down in terms of regional buy boxes being FBM, I would tend to agree. Just leave Maven on there. It'll focus on that margin. If there's a seller that comes, or rather a customer looking at your listing that's within that region, you could very well be in the buy box for that user, just not universal buy box winner, if you will. So yeah, I would agree to not really touch anything. Let Maven continue to do its thing. But if it does get to that point where you want to focus more so on the sales velocity side of things, that may be where you want to adjust to the specific buy box strategy, whether that's pricing below the buy box winner or matching that buy box price.
Nice. So Luke has a follow-up here talking about age-based rules. Sound like a good idea. Yeah, this is something, we added this to basically the application, so you can see the age of inventory broken down. Now the next thing is, how do we want to factor that in either to workflows, strategies, different things of that nature? So definitely a top of mind. Age of inventory is kind of a big deal. So this is top of mind for us right now. Will has a pretty cool one here. So sign up yesterday. Welcome. Happy to have you. I'm trying out the buy box targeting on some of my listings, and I have a question with how the software calculates ROI. When I set my minimum ROI to 30%, the software doesn't know exactly how much my shipping costs are. So it's an estimation of what my 30% ROI is. Basically, that ends up being a lot lower. So that is true. So if you're doing merchant fulfilled, Will, and please correct me if you're actually doing FBA, my assumption based on the question is you're actually doing merchant fulfilled, in which case that's correct. We're not factoring in your shipping costs. So you have two options here. Either you update your cost field for the product to include your estimated or your average, and I know that fluctuates a bit, but you can get some good averages there. You add that to your cost, in which case Aura will factor that into the ROI minimum calculation. Or number two, you increase the ROI. Casey, I know you have a really good kind of strategy for how to do that.
Yeah, so typically that second option is, for lack of a better term, the most automated way, less manual. You don't have to worry about making sure your costs are accurate, as long as that strategy factors in an additional few percentage points. Like if you're aiming for 30% ROI in this example, maybe you bump that to 33, 35%, just to factor in for that slightly lower cost field. The other option there, Will, is if you have like a typical range that you're aware of in terms of where the shipping costs typically lie, maybe it's between $2 and $5. I always recommend leaning towards the higher side of that range just to protect your margins. So in your example, it looks like you said you added about $2 to each ASIN on the cost field. That's going to be a great way to account for that shipping. But if you want to somewhat automate that process, I would definitely raise that minimum ROI on your strategies by a few percentage points, just to be able to take that slight discrepancy into account.
Yeah, awesome. So Mod, when is Aura going to work for Walmart? Love this question. Been hearing this a lot. So it is a high priority. What I will say though is we have a massive release coming out prior to us beginning to work on Walmart. So I anticipate it taking us a little bit longer, probably a few months before we begin to really like go really ham on it. What we are doing though is working with some of our integration partners to support what they do on the Walmart marketplace side, so that by the time like they will have that really perfected by the time we have Walmart repricing, and that integration already exists. And so what you're not getting is another tool that, you know, yeah, it works here, but like it's not connected to anything. It's still a lot of manual work. It's actually already integrated. And so on day 0, when that goes live, it's better than just having it by itself, if that makes sense. There's still a lot to figure out there. There's still like early days for Walmart, especially as a developer. There's a lot of data we can and can't get. So we have to figure out, kind of using first principles here, what works and what doesn't. I think this is where a lot of sellers don't fully understand the complexities of building something for a new platform, especially when you've already done a similar thing for a different platform, like repricing, where it's like, oh, you just do that thing over here. And actuality, like that's rarely the case. You have to really think from first principles, build from scratch, and say, okay, well, what does work and what doesn't work here? There's a bunch of testing that goes into that. And you unfortunately can't paper trade repricing. You have to actually do it. So definitely hype on the totem pole. But honestly, the whole team's pumped about Walmart. I think it's such an interesting time to get in as a seller, because it feels very, you know, Amazon 10 years ago, but they're moving faster on the developer side, putting a lot of resources into it. So I'm hoping that they learn a lot from how Amazon's journey has been so far, and they kind of fast track that and avoid some of their mistakes that really drew things out for a lot of sellers that were kind of painful. So hopefully they're kind of just looking at Amazon as a great example of saying what worked really well, what didn't work really well, and like, let's kind of just fast track this thing. So I think that's how it's going to go. Let's see. Follow-up question here: is Maven only best for suppressed listings? So actually, no. So Maven, the way I think about this is, whenever you get a new SKU, you want to default to using Maven, because you're probably going to get your best performance using that, and it requires little of your work. Now, that does not mean that Maven's right for every scenario. I always make that clear. No strategy works 100% of the time. That's rarely the case. There's too much complexity involved. However, Maven will automatically unsuppress your buy boxes. Now, you can design rule-based strategies to do this for you as well, but Maven will just automatically do that for you. So it works really well for that, but it's not only good for that, if that makes sense. Let's see, Luke here. So I check my pricing on each individual listing every couple of weeks on Chris Grant's recommendation. Love that. I spend the largest amount of time checking stock counts and sales velocity to determine if it's worth waiting out the tank or time to liquidate. Is stock counting ever a feature that repricers can use, since it's not in the API? What about extensions that could check my listing automatically and offer suggestions or rules? Yeah, this is a pretty complicated one. I like this one a lot though, because it's one of the things that I really wish we could solve, but it's just not available via the API. Is basically getting other sellers stock. If we could get their quantity of inventory, I can make some amazing decisions. Amazon does not make that available, unfortunately, which rationally makes sense, right? Like, you wouldn't want your stock to be available to other sellers, just like they wouldn't. So it's kind of a catch-22, like you want it, but you don't want to give it, kind of thing. So, you know, you have Chrome extensions that will do this in the browser. So they're not necessarily web scraping. They're doing it in the browser. You know, Keepa does provide some of this, but the problem with that is, like, it's not very accurate. So the issue is, you can make decisions based on that data, but that data is not reliable enough to make consistently good decisions. And so that potentially creates a lot of risk and issues. So like, you make one decision, it was fundamentally flawed because the data was flawed. That's a really big no-no in software. So until I can find a vendor that can give reliably accurate data related to that, it's really hard to want to support it. Kind of difficult, but yeah, I think the way you're doing this and looking at your competition and kind of manually checking that makes a ton of sense. I wish there was a much better way to automate that, because I would love to solve that problem. See, Franklin. Hey guys, I'm new using Maven. Question: when Maven is set up, the price that will compete to win buy box will be again FBA and merchant fulfilled together? If so, can I separate from merchant fulfilled because I only want to compete with FBA recommendations? How Maven work? Okay, so basically, like, how does Maven work against merchant fulfilled versus FBA offers? So what's interesting here to highlight is that Maven's not actually designed to increase your buy box ownership percentage. That sounds counterintuitive, but let me break this down. If you say, Dylan, I measure success by having a super high buy box ownership percentage, and give me that, I say, okay, cool, I can do that tomorrow. Do that today, right? Because all I need to do is lower your prices. You will get more sales and your buy box ownership percentage will go up. The problem with that, though, is you're going to get far less margin. And so you actually want to find this balance where there's a sweet spot of having buy box ownership percentage, but also protecting profit margin. So from that perspective, given that context, we're not really delineating between merchant fulfilled and FBA, although we do understand every single offer, which is which, because depending on who we're competing against, we will change our behaviors to basically work within those confines. So we do factor that in automatically for you, but you can't go into Maven and say, hey, like, don't compete against merchant fulfilled offers. That actually creates, as you add more and more limitations to an AI model, the performance starts to go down. You have law of diminishing returns, right? So as you add a little bit of limitations, the performance increases because it becomes more precise, all that good stuff. But eventually you add too many and actually the performance will start to go down. So I would actually recommend not avoiding merchant fulfilled offers because it's not that necessarily we're going to match them. It's that we could actually use them to our advantage here. So we do factor in that, okay, that current seller's merchant fulfilled, maybe I want to use a different behavior than if they were FBA as an example. Casey, anything you want to add on to that one?
No, I would just emphasize it is automatically configured to kind of recognize what type of seller is on each listing. But yeah, if you were to eliminate that whole portion of merchant fulfilled users, it'll limit the data that Maven's able to analyze, and just giving it more data is going to inform its decisions. It won't necessarily race to the bottom or race to match those merchant fulfilled offers. It will just look for what it considers to be that optimal price. So really just giving it more data with those merchant fulfilled users would be better there. So nothing you have to do there. It'll automatically take those nuances into account for you on Maven.
Yeah. Great question, though. See, Josh, appreciate the insight, guys. I'm new to, I can't speak today. I'm a new Aura user, and it's been great so far. Excited to see how it helps my business in the coming months. I've been 100% FBA until now, but figure I should mix in some merchant fulfilled. I'll take your advice and let Maven do its thing. Love that. Yeah, I think, mixing in some merchant fulfilled is never a bad thing, unless you just hate the workload, which I personally did. So, next one here, another question about Hyperdrive. My current plan only allows 10 ASINs, and I'm not sure which to use it on. Can you explain why you'd use Hyperdrive on a listing as opposed to another? Should I have Hyperdrive, or should I save Hyperdrive for listings with a more competitive buy box? Any tips would be greatly appreciated. Casey, you want to handle this one?
Yeah, so Will, in that scenario, Hyperdrive essentially just gives you an edge over the competition because it allows you to deploy price changes to Amazon in under 10 seconds. Typically, that processing signal, if you will, being sent from us to Amazon takes anywhere from 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes. By breaking that down to 10 seconds, it gives you a massive edge over those other sellers. So because of that, I always recommend using it on maybe some of your more successful listings, but more importantly, listings that have a lot of competitors on them or more than usual. Just if there's more competition, you're able to beat out more of them at once with Hyperdrive. So if you have a listing with maybe 10 competitive sellers on it, tends to be a really successful item for you. I'd recommend using it on that listing as opposed to a listing where you may be one of only 2 or 3 sellers on it. So essentially, any ones that you've seen decent sales on that have more sellers would be the ones I would use Hyperdrive on. And typically using Hyperdrive and Maven together leads to the best results as well. So if you've seen Maven being really effective on a handful of your listings, I would definitely recommend doubling down with Hyperdrive on some of those.
Yeah, well said. See, Luke, my work break is over. I love that we got people in here jumping in with us during their work break. That gives me so pumped because you have limited time and you chose to spend it with us. So Luke, I assume you already left, but thank you, dude, if you watch this after the fact, the recording. But Luke says, but I really appreciate you guys, and Aura is so simple compared to the way I used to have to micromanage listings and aggressiveness and past repricers that I've tried. And I love that I can 100% trust Aura to not tank my listings and frequently get sales above and well above the buy box. This is so important. I do want to highlight this for a reason, because a lot of what sellers have experienced prior to us coming out with Maven using AI-based repricers, which I would argue are not. It's nice marketing, but they're fundamentally not AI-based repricing tools. I've heard it countless times. It just tanked the listing or went straight to my min price. If that's the case, that kind of fundamentally tells me it's not AI, or that you are not very skilled at developing any kind of AI. Because if it does the thing that your users don't want it to do, then you failed. Unfortunately, that's just the reality of it. So it's nice when we get to see users. I think trust, right? This is the thing I really want to highlight here, is like when you can actually trust your tools to do what you expect them to do, you can free that up from your brain and refocus that time and attention and energy on sourcing, which is where you should be spending the vast majority of your time, or building a team wherever you're at in your journey. So Luke, appreciate that. It's awesome. See, Ahmad, how long do you think we should test Maven strategy on a listing? 1 week or 30 days in starts? So it's less about a time-based thing, although you could view it this way. And it's hard for me to give you an exact number because every seller is so different. I know when I was a seller, if I wanted to basically move inventory in 2 weeks, I wanted, and I was doing wholesale, right? So I could place as many orders as I want. So instead of placing very large bulk orders, I would actually schedule like orders every 1 to 2 weeks. So I would do high frequency orders to spread out that age of inventory. And basically I had far more liquidity in my capital. So for me, it was like 2 weeks. But for regular sellers, that really does not make sense. So the way you want to think about this is, after what period of time do you want to start getting your capital back? It could be 30 days, could be 60. It really depends. I think anything over 60 is probably not a good idea unless that's a long-term merchant fulfilled hold for you. Like if you're long-term flipping Legos, that's its own kind of thing, but we're talking volume here. I would say 30 is probably a decent number, but ultimately it is up to you. That $30 or that 30 days may be too sluggish for you and maybe too fast. It really just depends. So for you, I would really kind of think through, what target are you going for in terms of your age of inventory, and then try to hit that. That's going to help you out a ton. But Casey, is there anything you want to add on to that?
No, I would tend to agree. There's definitely a lot of nuances depending on your own specific business setup, whether you're merchant fulfilled, FBA, however you're managing that. But if you're more so asking Ahmad, how long does it take for Maven to become intelligent on a listing? There are a lot of factors that play into that as well. Typically, I do recommend testing it for at least 1 week on a listing, but in general, if there's a listing that has a lot of competitors on it, a lot of pricing updates, a lot of sales, Maven will become more intelligent quicker on that listing because of the data that is available, compared to a listing that may only have a couple sellers on it, not getting a lot of sales. So that will factor in, but I would definitely say test it for 1 week, see how the results are. If you're getting really great on some listings and not so great on others, you can then maybe think about adjusting. But in terms of it becoming intelligent and smart on those listings, it does depend on the competition and sales movement on a listing. So it can be anything from a few days on a competitive listing to a little bit over a week for a non-competitive listing. That does fluctuate as well.
Yeah. Yeah, good catch there. Yeah, I think one thing that I like highlighting with people too is every seller is kind of different in terms of what they prioritize and how they do certain things. And so what we try to do is say all the things that like really are repricing skill, let us do that for you, but then basically reduce down the tasks that we require of you, that we give you the responsibility of, to just the things that really are unique to each individual seller. Like could be 30 days, 45 days, 90 days. It really depends. ROI is a good example for like your minimum. Some sellers are like, I want to move as fast as possible. 0% ROI makes sense for me. Or I buy incredibly well, 100% minimum. Like there are very few variables that need to be factored in that are very specific to you that you should have full control over. Everything else we can kind of make more complicated in our back end and abstract away the complexities from you, right? So how do we basically give and create more performance through the complexities, but not have to push a lot of the responsibility of managing those complexities to you, the end user, which is what happens a lot in other tools, which is like, oh, we have all this AI, but here's, 30 something settings you have to go and tweak. It's like, okay, well, how does that make sense? Right. Like ideally software creates technical leverage, meaning I put in 0.5 units, so half a unit of input, and I should get out more than 2. Like that's the whole thing of software, of technology, period, the internet, whatever. And so if you're using tools that are actually creating more work for you, you're not really getting the advancement of the technical leverage. You actually just added more onto your plate, which kind of is frustrating. Let's see, Defam, which strategy should we use on the listings we are only FBA seller versus merchant fulfilled sellers? And which strategy should we use if we are the only seller on the listing? So good questions. Okay, so basically if you're the only FBA seller and going against merchant fulfilled, I would still recommend that you default to Maven because it's going to factor all these things in for you. Also, for your second question, what do you use if you're the only seller on a listing? Funny enough, Maven, and I'll explain why. Maven calculates what we call the optimal price. And this is a fluctuating thing, right? And the optimal price is the balance between sales velocity and profitability. This value shifts as the dynamics of the listing changes. So what's interesting is the dynamics of a listing can change, like the demand can change even if you're the only seller. So we've tested this internally where we're the only FBA seller, we're the only seller, period. And Maven's actually, I think we came in at $88, got a sale, spiked the demand because now it's in stock, all that stuff. It started to rank again. Maven raised it to, I believe, $98, maybe 95. We got sales there, but then things slowed down. And so we actually pulled it back a little bit and found somewhere in between and started getting consistent sales there. So it's nice as you can actually use Maven on listings where you're the only seller because we are factoring in something, a target called the optimal price that is changing as we're seeing things change. So funny enough, my answers to both your questions are very simple. Use Maven. I know it sounds very trite, but that's just the reality of it. But Casey, anything you want to add on to that?
No, I would definitely kind of retweet everything you just said in terms of doubling down on Maven in both of those scenarios. Defam, there is, if you wanted to make a custom rule, that would be available to you. You could target the lowest FBA seller. And then there would be a setting in the pursuit section for when there's no competition on the listing. That would be if you're the only seller on the listing or if you're the only FBA seller on the listing. And you can have it go to your max price, raise your price by a little bit, a couple options there. But I would tend to agree with Dylan in this scenario just to use Maven in both of those situations just to avoid more manual work, having to think about more complexities on your own. Maven will automatically take care of that for you.
Yeah. And again, this is why we designed Maven the way we did, is there's always these what if situations. But if you can design the model to understand like a more conceptual version of all these what ifs, it's a lot easier to basically handle all those complexities. Then you have to go in and create all, if we didn't have Maven, I'd say, well, here's the strategy you should create. Now that's yet another strategy you need to have and understand when to apply, when not to apply, versus I can just say, actually just use Maven. Like it's going to do all that for you. So that's what's nice is, again, you're getting far more performance, handling far more scenarios by doing far less work. That's the value there to me. See, Franklin has a good one here. To avoid Maven reaching the merchant fulfilled price on a listing to win the buy box, should I consider manual minimum price since I am FBA? Casey, you want to handle that one?
So for Franklin, you could use a manual minimum price on that if you wanted to if you recognize, hey, all the merchant fulfilled offers are under $15. I'm just going to send my min price there. Definitely an option. With Maven looking for that optimal price, it's never going to just shoot down to match a merchant fulfilled listing. It's always going to find what it determines to be that best price point for velocity and margin. Tends to more so focus on the margin side of things a little bit compared to the sales velocity side. So specifically, I wouldn't necessarily worry about changing that minimum price. Or Maven and Aura in this situation will recognize that you're FBA and those other sellers are merchant fulfilled. So, I mean, it's tough to explicitly say how Maven would react in that specific scenario. I would be as bold as to say the only real scenario I could think of where it would go as low to match that merchant fulfilled listing would be is if customers are only buying from those merchant fulfilled sellers. That would probably be pretty rare in that scenario.
Yeah.
So I would personally leave your min price as is, providing Maven with the widest range possible is going to lead to the best results, so it can continue to test those price points. But with that being said, if you do want to restrict and not go as low as those merchant fulfilled offers, absolutely an option to put in a manual min price there.
Yeah. It's kind of a tough one. Like Casey's saying, it is very rare that would occur, but in case where it would occur is if the optimal price was actually down there and you for whatever reason were like super high up, in which case that would be rational. Like that's actually where you should be at, because just having a artificially high price that looks profitable but getting zero sales is kind of irrelevant to me versus like actually like where's the actual market at here. So that's what I tend to think about with this stuff. Nice. Yeah. Have a little bit more time here. We've got about 20 minutes. So definitely having more time to dive deeper into a lot of cool stuff here. Let's see.
Yeah, Maven reminds me of the old Madden video games. You could manage how you sold concessions, and it was always nice to fine tune your hot dog price, because you could figure out, I get less sales if I price it at $6, but I actually get more profit if I price it at $4 because I sell more hot dogs. And you could actually manipulate the concessions in Madden to get more revenue or whatever.
That's funny.
Maven's been making me think about that a little bit recently. Any EA Sports developers watching this video, bring that feature back into Madden. It would be a lot of fun to manage the business that way, but I'm sure you have bigger fish.
Casey just wants to play sports games for the economics of it, not even for the gameplay. That should be a version of EA Sports games. It's like you're not even playing the sport; you're just managing the franchise, and like that's all you do. That actually, I would probably play that. I'm not super into sports. That could make me get interested. I'm not gonna lie. It's like what's the old games?
They used to have
there's a zoo version. There's a roller coaster tycoon, zoo tycoon. Those were my jam. Got to manage all the pricing and all. Oh, so cool. So cool.
Yeah. I have some big soccer fan friends who use a game, like it's only on PC, called Football Manager, where you get to sign the players, you do all the contracts, you manage the business, but you don't actually play any games. It would just simulate the games based on your roster build and things like that. But yeah, there's definitely some interesting things you can do with sports games these days.
Honey, what are you doing in that game? Signing contracts.
Spending millions over here. Don't worry about it.
I'm locking down a deal. Leave me alone. Oh, I love that. That's exciting. Funny enough, you just kind of talking about gaming. I actually learned a lot from playing like RuneScape and World of Warcraft when I was younger. I got into some of the actual like campaign based stuff, the raids and whatnot, but not as much, because I really liked the mini economies. It was so interesting. You have the sandboxed economy where you could just test different theories, and if you went to zero, you went broke. It didn't really matter in real life, and you just re-roll and have fun. And funny enough, like I learned a lot about like selling things on Amazon, doing RAOA from playing World of Warcraft, because they have something called the auction house. So it's a market, and there's like your A to A flips. Yeah, straight up from World of Warcraft, because I would go in late at night, find a niche market where I had enough currency where I could buy all of it, and then I could raise the market 25% overnight. And when the early players got in, they paid a premium because I reset the market. Or I would find people that were undervalued. I'd buy it, bring it up to market, and make a profit on it. Everybody else was buying to consume. I was like, no, I'm going to buy to flip. And I would just do this nonstop. It was the weirdest thing, funny enough, I was just making fun of, signing contracts in a video game. Though I'm not even playing the game. I'm literally just like playing the auction house and like trading, which is like so dorky to think about. But that's what's interesting is like, especially as these newer sellers are getting started, the younger sellers, especially if they're grew up heavy into gaming, they do have somewhat of a leg up, because just conceptually what they have already learned, they're just applying in a real world context. And so they're able to move faster and make better decisions, because a lot of the patterns, at least high level, they've already somewhat seen. Obviously, there's subtle nuances and changes and stuff like that, but it is kind of interesting when you take the mechanics of these kind of things in a game and then apply it to real world situations.
Yeah. Yeah. Marketplace functions in lots of games like, Skyrim and massive inventories where you can sell things. That's always intriguing to me. I've never had the attention span to be able to manage large inventory, which is why I tend to trend towards those video games or sports games rather. But yeah, I've seen some friends manage some really complex games, and there is a lot of natural business practices that you can learn in those environments with very little stakes, because it's all fake money or currency or whatever game you're playing. So
I know there were like extensions for World of Warcraft that would like help you with auction house, like getting more data and stuff. I do wonder now, because I don't recall if this is true, if there were like price optimization extensions for these games. I don't recall.
It makes sense.
So interesting. All right, so Aura's now going to develop repricing for World of Warcraft and RuneScape.
I'm sure there's a market for it.
Oh, it's totally. The botting. Oh man, absolutely. So we have a handful of time here. So any questions we could dive deep into? Again, open session format here. Casey and I are just going to kind of geek out in the in between. But anything you have related to repricing or selling just in general, we're happy to answer, dive deep into, give some feedback on. Would love your feedback too. So, we've had a handful of people in here who started using us yesterday and have loved it so far. Love hearing that kind of stuff. Any feedback in terms of product improvements, ideas, or frustrations you even have, want to hear all that. So go ahead and throw all those things into the comment section, and we'll start to wrap up here.
It is nice. Go ahead.
No, please.
I was going to ask if there's been any AI developments in your day to day in terms of tools that you're using, or whether it's AI or not AI that you're using to kind of optimize the free time you have.
Yeah, so there has been some. So I kind of switched away from Chat GPT to Claude, so by Anthropic. So Claude's a little bit better for writing, and I write quite a bit. But the major thing that I like about Anthropic is they have this tool where like prompt engineering is a real skill, and you can get it right and get it wrong. I demonstrated this to our team at a lunch and learn one day. So how you prompt, and by prompt, just the input you're giving to the AI does dictate the quality of the output. So that's actually really time consuming. So there's things where I'm like, oh, this would speed me up, but I have to write this super detailed prompt. Like that's going to take just the same amount of time as just doing the work. So it's irrelevant. But Claude came out with this prompt tool, and you give it the minimal amount. Hey, you're going to do X, Y, and Z. Here's the inputs I'm going to give you. Here's the output I want. And then it crafts that into a highly detailed prompt that's massive, which is incredible. But then they have this interface where, because you said, here's the two inputs I'm going to give you, it says, great, those are variables. It gives you on the side let's say I gave it 2 inputs. It's going to give me 2 input fields to say, cool, here's those things, give it to me, and then run it. And so I found I can have ideas, spin things up much faster at higher qualities, and then use it more repeatedly than using ChatGPT, because the interface is great for having a conversation. But sometimes I really want to say, I'm almost making like a mini software here that does this one thing. And so that's been really, really helpful. And, I like the whole concept of agents. And so with agents, you create different personas, right? So you say, let's say I'm going to have a content creation team, well, what does that team compose of? I'm going to have somebody who writes an outline. I'm going to have somebody who writes the blog post, somebody who does research, and maybe an editor. Well, these are 4 different AIs I need to create. Well, now I can create these really fast, give them personas. And then I could just say, cool, here's your input, take the output, give it to the next one. Right. And like, I can create this linear process. That's really incredible. Or let's just say, I write, but my writing's not amazing. So I have an editor AI that I give my rough draft to, and it goes, great, here's a few areas we can make it better. Here's how to think about this. This sentence structure is a little too hardcore. Like I rewrote it for you. Like I can get feedback more readily than like pinging the team to be like, hey guys, what do you think about this? Because like now I'm taking you away from your work. I can now default to that and get 90% of the way there. And it's not perfect, but it works pretty well. So like that's the biggest change lately is just I've been able to get more utility out of it. So that's been pretty cool.
Nice.
Yeah. Getting keen on our team to start testing some stuff on the AI front too. I'm trying to push more of everybody on the team to use more AI where it makes sense. I think just AI for AI's sake is kind of a dumb idea, but when it can speed you up or add better quality and stuff like that, why not? And actually the blog post I did 2 weeks ago where I basically re-examined that experiment with ChatGPT doing listing optimization, that I use Claude by Anthropic to do that. And so that kind of highlights basically everything I just said here. Like I break down all the prompts and the inputs, outputs, visuals, all that stuff of like how it works. And yeah, it's very different. It's really cool, but there's a big push right now for kind of creating AI employees, not like full stack, but just like they do this one thing really well. Like relevanceai.com has a BD, I think it's a BSR, BDR. I think it's a BDR sales AI. And you basically give it the targets and it, crafts the cold outreach email, goes back and forth. And basically like you're giving the input of here's all of our target people for sales. It runs the playbook. And then the output ideally is you just have meetings scheduled to like have the deeper discussion and close it, which is like super interesting. So a lot of research going into that world. So we're not quite at a point where like that is very usable. There's a lot of problems with it. But it is kind of interesting where we can take everybody on the team and say, cool, we're going to put these AI employees under you. You're going to manage that. And then they're going to do the execution, but you're now managing strategy. You're now, thinking more holistically, finding new avenues for us to go explore. And you're saying, cool, here's one area that we know works really well. Can we build a team or employee that can manage the day-to-day on that? That frees you up to now say, cool, what are the other avenues of things that we have yet to explore because we haven't had the capacity to do so until now? And then you can rinse and repeat. We're still, I would say, at least a year, maybe year and a half away from that being realistic. But even Lemonade, who I use for like home insurance and stuff, has recently, they just tweeted today actually that they have been using AI agents to basically manage their pet claims and have handled like 160,000 of those really well. And they're known for amazing workflows and processes and support and stuff. So you're starting to see this happen already, but it's like at the enterprise level where they're like having to manually roll their own, but you're going to see off the shelf things that are coming pretty fast too.
Yeah.
So
nice.
Yeah. See, let's wrap up here with a few things from Wayne. New user, I'm very impressed so far. Awesome. Happy to hear that. Thanks for the product. You spoke about testing Maven on an ASIN for about a week. Does that mean is it the best strategy for smaller sellers with low inventory levels? Most of my listings are 10 units or less. I'm in turbo growth mode, LOL. So that's not really what Casey's saying. What Casey's saying is depending on, basically there's a learning phase that Maven goes through. Really doesn't matter if you're a new seller or large seller. That's really not the point. It's just we need enough data to kind of see what's happening to make optimal decisions. We'll still reprice and all that good stuff in the meantime. But if it's a very active listing, it could take honestly like an hour. In some cases I've seen where it's like, cool, I know exactly what's happening here. Like we're good to go. We're like 80, 90% of the way, if not 100. Other ones where there's not a whole lot of activity, it can take a little bit longer to see enough data to make optimal decisions. So you're still going to get repricing based on what it does know. It's just going to take a little bit longer on your less active SKUs. So you should still be using it even though you're a small seller. Definitely not a problem there. Let's see, Mohammed, I just signed up for a free trial and connected my Seller Central. I can't see my listings as I already connected marketplaces. So this could take, depending on how many listings you have, up to 30 minutes from when you connect that marketplace, Mohammed. What I would recommend, if you're still not seeing that after 30 minutes, reach out to the support team in live chat in that bottom right blue button. Click on that, reach out to the support team and just say, hey guys, still not seeing it here. We're happy to take a look and see if there's any issues. But sometimes it takes a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. Nice. Awesome. So we are going to wrap up here for time. Appreciate everybody coming again. We do this every week, every Wednesday from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. EST. We jump in here, open format. We just ask for questions. We dive deep into whatever you guys have for us, and try to provide as much value as we can. So we appreciate you making the time, especially if you joined us on a work break. I appreciate you choosing to spend that time with us. That means a lot. Definitely share the recordings, get more people in here. The more questions we get, the better the conversations are. So invite your friends and fellow sellers. And with that, we'll let you get back to the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and we'll see you next week for next session.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye, guys.